On the night of January 15th, 1954, a huge storm started battering the west coast of the island of Sodor. Most settlements in this area sit well above sea level, such as Wellsworth and Tidmouth. However, Knapford was a different story. Sitting on a small, marshy flatland south of the Tidmouth Hills, Knapford was located in a dangerous area. In the 1880s, the town had contracted A.W. Dry, an earth-moving company, to build a series of embankments to protect the town from the annual flooding. These protections were still in place at the time of the 1954 storm. The embankments had one serious flaw, however. There is an old pier in Knapford town that blocked the embankments from meeting up with the mound next to Knapford Harbor. Usually this pier and the harbor pier would limit any flooding into the weak area, but the January storm saw continual heavy rain for over a week. These protections were overwhelmed by January 19th, and the town of Knapford began to flood. Quickly, a state of emergency was declared, and more than 3/4 of Knapford's population was evacuated to the surrounding towns. The water level didn't retreat out of Knapford until February 7th, with the cleanup effort starting the 12th. Over 600 buildings in Knapford town had been severely damaged, with almost 40 being completely destroyed. The pier that blocked the embankment was left in ruins, and 1,000 people were left temporarily homeless. Knapford was, and still is, one of the biggest towns on Sodor, and recognizing that it might be completely destroyed if another big storm occurred, the Sodor Council decided to directly fund a new embankment project. The NWR's mainline and Farquhar branch lines were to be raised above the ground, with the Knapford station being demolished and raised up onto the embankments. And then the pre-existing levees would be expanded to interlock with the railway embankments, forming a constant protective layer from the Tidmouth foothills right to the south side of the Ells River. The pier would be abandoned to facilitate this project. For those displaced by the disaster, a new raised community would be built for them to live in. In total, the project was to cost £17 million, $583 million today, and take 3 years to complete. On top of that, it was decided to reopen and expand Knapford Harbor to supplement the congestion at Tidmouth Harbor. It was hoped that the new harbor would recuperate some of the costs from the construction, and was directly owned by the Sodor Council. The first job was the railway embankments. Obviously, the railway wanted them done as quickly as possible so they could start running trains again. On March 5th, the project began as a ferry service left Brendam Harbor to Tidmouth Harbor to replace the train services for the time being. On April 28th, the first train ran over the newly completed embankments. The railway immediately got to work building the harbor. The line down to the harbor had to be reworked in order to meet the racetrack at the branch line. As such, Dryow Station was turned into a goods station at the point where the harbor line and the branch line linked up. A new station for Dryow was built a little bit up the line. Knapford Station and yards were completely rebuilt to be on top of the embankments, which actually helped to remove a lot of the yard's rotting infrastructure at the time. The line to the harbor had been built after the embankments had already been finished, and Percy arrived to take charge of the centerpiece of the railway's reconstruction, the harbor. Knapford Harbor had been closed since 1930, and when that had happened, it had only been located on the north side of the Ells River. When it was reopened 24 years later, it was expanded to the south with new piers replacing the old one, which had sunk into the bay during the disuse period. Percy was put in charge of this project, which was wrapped up by 1955. The old pier's berth was turned into a designated spot for the harbor pilot tug. To enter the harbor, the road passes through the embankments, which can be closed off in a flooding event. A similar system was built across the Ells River behind the harbor. The new embankment system is the epicenter of much pride in Knapford town, a symbol of the people's determination to carry on in the worst of conditions. and it celebrates their efforts to avoid a similar disaster ever again. Their efforts aren't wasted either, because once the system was completed in 1955, Knapford town has never been at risk of flooding ever again.